open your eyes. You know the way the world works. There isn't a ministry of truth anywhere to be found anywhere in the world, but there's lots of ministry of prophets in disguise. And, what's good for us or bad for us doesn't come into it. You've got to find your own way through that. And I'm fearful. It does worry me.
How did you find the carnivore diet?
Indirectly through the keto diet recommendations originally. My first brush with keto probably dates back to about 17, 18, when a colleague at work suggested that we might try one of these New Year body transformations. We'd both been talking about going back to the gym and looking at resistance work a bit more seriously. We'd both been using it in a sort of I suppose, an uneducated way for our respective sports. But we were dialing down on the sport. We were quite interested in the resistance side of things. There was an emerging sort of interest in bodybuilding and resistance training, and then subsequently the diet. So someone came in with a magazine after the Christmas holidays, and it was one of these typical men's health type magazines with a body transformation, an individual on the front who allegedly looked like a mere mortal at the start of it, and 16 weeks later was suitably ripped and toned and worthy of being a cover model. So we were chatting about that at work, and we thought, surely this can't be, we need to investigate this and see if there's more to this. And so we knew to give it a fair crack, that we'd spend several weeks finding the right sort of gym with the right equipment in the right location to work. And then we discovered that there was a 12-week booklet that came along with this transformation, and it was authored by Nick Mitchell, who owns the UP gyms, which are global, and he was emerging at that time as someone who had a growing reputation for these body transformations. So we read the booklet inside and out, and unbeknown to us, although it didn't state as much, the sort of loose diet recommendations within it were effectively a ketogenic diet. His methodology was to get fat off people as quickly as possible, and then try and develop some muscle tone towards the end of the 12-week program. And this had obviously worked quite well for him, because that huge volume of these successful body transformations already being advertised through the sort of London gyms, and he was spreading on the different continents with this methodology. So my friend and I decided to practice this diet for a few weeks just to see if it was sustainable. I can't say that I wasn't big on snacking or a huge eater of carbs anyway. So the diet to me didn't look particularly challenging. I suppose the only slightly weird aspect was the switch to sort of roast beef and vegetables for breakfast. I mean, that was something that took a few weeks to sort of the desire, I suppose. But unbeknown to me at the time and my colleague, we were following a ketogenic diet, and it was essentially 3 main meals a day that comprised of meat and either salad and vegetables, with an additional protein source in between, which could have been a small Greek yogurt or a can of tuna or something of that nature. And to cut a long story short, we both lost, about 5 weeks in, we both lost a lot of weight very quickly. And that was the first real sort of anecdotal sort of experience or evidence I had of the effects of a ketogenic diet. I know that period of fat metabolization can vary from person to person. So for me, it was around 5 weeks. And I remember things happened extremely quickly around that period. Up until the 5 weeks, I couldn't see a huge change in body composition or the way my trousers fitted or shirts fitted or anything of that nature. But suddenly at the 5-week mark, I remember my brother picking me up take me to a local football match, and we were walking. I still remember this conversation. We were chatting normally, and he stopped me halfway along the walk, and he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I've never felt fitter." And I said, "Why do you ask?" He said, "You look so thin." He said, "You've lost so much weight so quickly. Have you been checked out?" He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "No, I think I said, ordinarily I would." I said, "But I'm pretty certain there's a solid reason for it in this case." And at that stage, fat was just melting off me. And I got very thin very quickly. So, then I was sort of able to start increasing food intake, and the training. I was still able to sustain the training. But I looked quite, wiry. There was a moderate amount of muscle definition at the end of the 12 weeks, but over a relatively short period of time, it still had transformed my shape. And without the benefit of someone like Nick Mitchell doing the PTing on a daily basis, I think I probably would have achieved close to something like the sort of illustrations that that were being publicised at the time on the magazines and the cover magazines. So that to me said there's something there. There's something that works with this, and that these body transformations are not just photoshopped. That something is happening. So I just went on a very sort of broad journey after that of different training methodologies with different people. And a few years after that, I trained with a different PT who was very pro carb. And I went back on to quite a sort of a high carb diet with his recommendation. And I noticed that within the space of 3 or 4 months, my body composition, the look of it, had just shifted right back to where it had been as a somewhat portly 40-something office worker before I'd attempted this body transformation. I suppose, the best example of it just being, the sort of archetypal dad bod. Shapeless and white, and with sort of creeping insulin resistance.
Kind of big in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, under the chest, just becoming shapeless. I mean, the sort of six-pack had long gone, and the stomach was just starting to protrude out. And every shopping expedition, which would be every sort of 5-6 months, seemed to require another set of trousers with a bigger waistband. And I'd gone from a sort of a 30-inch waist, because I've always been quite slight, sort of 70 kg type, but my weight was increasingly getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I was sort of up to 36-inch waist trousers, I think, at this stage. And he was videoing me, and we were looking at technique and movements and things like that. And all I could really see was just this growing mass around my waistline sitting above the shorts, which had come about in a pretty quick period of time. And I thought, well, if this bulking and cutting thing is really the requirement to build, a significant amount of muscle, do I really want to go through these cycles as a sort of a mid-40 something going into my 50s, living this sort of boom bust thing? It didn't strike me as a particularly healthy way to live. And ultimately, I just wanted to be fairly lean and look quite athletic all year round. So that sort of switched my thinking back into the sort of ketogenic method. And then he didn't really approve of that, I have to say. But around this time, I'd sort of fallen into the sort of thing that a lot of people do in this space, whereby, because training and diet had helped me mentally through a phase of unhappiness, I was doing all sorts of courses. I decided to do my own PT qualification, not with any real serious intent of using it for an occupation, just because, as you alluded to earlier, I'd kind of found my tribe. I was in the company of people at the weekends who were like-minded. it helped me mentally. It gave me energy. It gave me motivation. I was, my head full of questions. I was starting out in this thing. I was doing, various courses on nutrition, and there was stuff in there that seemed conflicting, contradictory. And I just wanted to get out there and talk to people about it. So, gyms and chat rooms and things like this became the sort of preserve of the weekend. And so there was a lot of stuff, aside my own training, there was a lot of stuff going on in the background as well from a sort of an educational point of view. So head full of questions, as I said, and I thought, I've put a lot of weight back on. Certainly going to hope there's some muscle been built underneath all that over these last few months of hard graft. But I just didn't look like the way I looked again. And so this was. So what was the first year of the pandemic here? Was it 19 or 20? I forget.
So it's kind of 2020, right?
It's 20. So we'd had the lockdowns, and then there was some freedom that summer, I seem to recall, because I think everyone sort of naively thought it had gone away come sort of May. And we were out mixing in sort of each other's company again. And we'd had a short break up the coast and went to a little bookshop in a seaside town. So I had this stuff going on in my head about not being happy with the way I looked and wanting to revisit the keto stuff. And I'm wandering around this little bookshop, wonderful little bookshop, and I looked up and I saw this huge manual on the shelf called The Keto Reset by Mark Sisson and Brad Kearns. So I thought, there's the holiday reading. So I grabbed that, and cut a long story short, I sat in a beach hut for 2 weeks, ingesting this from front to back, and I was fascinated by it, absolutely fascinated. I thought, how is, this all seems so creditable. How is this not mainstream information? I'd already tested it on myself. I knew it worked from a fat burning perspective. I looked and felt great on it. And there I was just reading more endorsement of this stuff and, and more sort of alleged science. I say alleged science because I'm not qualified to know what science is valid and what isn't. But, I look for objectivity, I look for reasoning. And then, once I'm fairly convinced by that, it's all anecdotal from that point on, isn't it? You just experiment on yourself and you learn from that point of view. So being the sort of sportsman that I am, I ignored all the advice about gradual, slow coming back off of carbs, and I returned on Monday, and it was like, no, if this is optimal, and this is what I need, and this is going to give me an extra 5%, that I'm starting on Monday. So that was it. Everything got swept out of the cupboards and dumped that shouldn't have been in there, and we went on to meat and veg. And this time it took a little longer to get that weight off, to a point where I was actually starting to doubt if that was going to work again. And at that stage, I'd started to incorporate a little bit of HIIT work, high intensity work, just through frustration that the fat wasn't moving. And it took a couple of weeks longer than the previous. But then again, it all seemed to happen overnight. You sort of almost wake up with an instantaneous sort of six-pack, don't you? It's incredible how it all just sort of melts away. And they're slightly gaunt. And I thought, well, I won't worry about that, because that will fill out again like it did before. And then you sort of find your level with it. So I suppose since September 20, when I came home and then started it seriously, and then, I just did so much. I was being taught nutrition, and then I started to study nutrition alongside that. So, all of my spare time was being taken up by reading the textbooks and trying to satisfy those requirements, but listening to you guys as a side to that, trying to keep an open mind, forming my own views and opinions, often contradictory to what I was being taught, which was really challenging. But then just, diving into Noakes, diving into Cyrus, listening to Bar, listening to yourself. And the further things went on, I thought, well, it seems like I'm just becoming more and more carnivore. And I had a conversation with Richard Smith, who I think has also done a chat with Bart, along with Alan Reeves, the Keto King. I had a chat with Richard. I've been aware of Richard for a year or so before this, and we'd had various conversations on WhatsApp, and I just really admired the courage of his convictions. You know, the guy sold his properties to go and advocate a carnivore lifestyle, such as his, you know, his belief in it. So I thought, well, you know, you can't do better than that. So I started sort of following him, listening to him. I was buying his products as well, which were helping to supplement the diet. And then we had a chat this Christmas, just last gone, and we were talking about plateaus in weight, plateaus in weight training. I was aware that he'd won a European bodybuilding competition on carnivore, so I was quite curious as to how he achieved that mass. I was certainly happy with the way I looked, but I plateaued, and I wasn't, you know, after a couple of years of combining sort of calisthenics with weights, I certainly wasn't getting any bigger. So it was quite nice to chat to him about it. And he said, look, you know, I'm not telling you what to do, but, you know, things kicked on for me a notch when I gave up the veg and I stopped eating the broccoli. He said I was still eating copious amounts of vegetables, and they were still contributing to the last few little remaining sort of immuno, you know, ailments and things that were lurking around his system. And he said the key to carnivore was you know, the big step up for him. So I thought, you know, logically it makes sense. I was heading in that direction anyway. You know, I was starting to minimize. The more I was learning about, you know, lectins and plants, and you just start to question, you know, you think, well, you've only really got them in there as an insurance policy, because you've still got this voice at the back of your head, you know, for 40 years of conditioning that say that you need them, that you have to have them, that they've got to be there. You're not going to get your micronutrients. And I'd already come to terms with the fact that the meat that I was consuming was providing everything that I knew I had to consume to enjoy optimal health. But still, you have that little voice, and I thought perhaps it's time I just turn that off. And so from January this year, haven't been lying carnivore. I do eat Greek yogurt and cheese and eggs, but the vegetables are not being added, and that's sort of me up to date, really. I'm still sort of, you know, working through my experience of that, and I tinker with that on a fairly sort of weekly basis. I probably eat more yogurt than I should, and I know that I would be a lot tighter and leaner if I didn't. So that says to me that I still have a susceptibility to sugar in some form, because when I consume it, even in a relatively healthy form like Greek yogurt, it still has a sort of a rounding effect on my shape. So mentally, that says to me, you know, you've still got a slight, not necessarily. I think I'm insulin sensitive now. I haven't followed this for 2-3 years. I mean, if I was ever to relapse and indulge in something carby, I don't think it would have a huge impact. But the daily intake of yogurt, if I was going to chop something out, you know, if I was ever going to sort of go into competition or something of that nature, I know that would be the thing that. But it's so, I mean, making these emotional connections to things so easy. You know, I'm so into habits and how habits are formed at the moment. That's just forming another part of education, and I recognise the same thing in myself. You know, and this yogurt is an after work thing. It's, you know, it's something you can put something sweet in, like whey powder. So there's still something there in the brain. Is, you know, when you've had a hard day at work, you know, those 40 years of you know, programming, you know, that desire to eat sugar and sweet things when, you know, you've got to depress the stress and things like that. That's it. The only difference is you can recognize it in yourself now, and you can recognize the habits for what they are, at least. And if you can identify them, then you see the cues. Hopefully you can change the rewards, but and shift into. But once they're laid down, they're very difficult to. I mean, energy drinks, I'll be honest. I mean, that's another. I'm fortunate enough. I've got a garden gym, and I started to recognise an association there this summer with, just that cold fizz first thing in the morning, and the pump, of just being in the garden and really working hard through calisthenic programs. And then suddenly you've got an emotional connection there. And I'm fortunate enough to sort of recognize that. And I threw them away and got back on the electrolytes and trained under those instead. It's just, even if you live in a very disciplined lifestyle, it's still, it's like, I suppose, any form of addiction. Those pathways are laid down. You're still finding a way
those
to
habits. Those
Yeah.
habits are so easy to form.
Oh God, yeah.
So on this point, just regarding conditioning, something you said earlier on, I found so interesting. It's like the second time you went on to keto and you saw very fast results relatively. And it's like, why don't people tell us about this? Like, this works for me. And it's amazing, that kind of thing, like literally, why don't people tell us about this stuff? We're losing weight, we're feeling better, but then there's someone coming to us and saying, no, this is the wrong way to do it. You're doing it wrong. You need to be eating these cornflakes or this whole grain bread,
Muesli,
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I think, for me, I'll tell you another little anecdote, little story. When I was learning or being taught, when I was being taught nutrition, there's a distinction. When I was being taught nutrition, I was working with a guy who was very, very unhappy at the time with both his weight and his mental health. And he became something of a case study, though he's a friend of mine. He had a BMI of 30. He hadn't been tested at the time, but I'd be very surprised if he wasn't pre-diabetic. He had all of the typical sort of emotional eating habits that we just discussed. His life was lived on the road. He was a traveling salesman, and he had all these emotional connections with fast food and sales tribes. So his day would start full of positivity. I'm going to go out, I'm going to conquer the world. And that had become associated with a hot chocolate and a sausage bap. And then the first sales would come in, and it was a trip to McDonald's to celebrate that. So there was all this emotional stuff that we had to sort of try and, help him recognize and understand. To his credit, I think when we did the calories in, calories out, and on all the calculations, and, tested them with all the different maintenance calculators and methodologies that were out there. I think at the time he had some, because of his BMI, his intake was like 2,800 calories a day because of his size, and he was consuming in the end something like 1,500 calories, but with the macronutrient recommendations of carbs at every meal. And the guy was beside himself. He was going off to shows and things. He was knackered. He had no energy. All he wanted to do was sleep. And he wasn't losing a pound. He wasn't shifting a pound. And, I was sort of kind of, people saying, oh, he's lying on his diary. And I said, well, no, I don't think so. And I spent quite a lot of time with this guy at work and on the road. No, he's desperate, and he's living this, but something's just not working here. And we kept looking at it. And I sat in Starbucks one miserable wet Saturday afternoon. And I thought, what is the basis of this 3,500 calories equals 1 pound formula that is the sort of bedrock of all these nutrition programs? At that point, I had so much to take on board that I just accepted this blindly. But I had a sort of an epiphany one afternoon. What is the origin of this? How's this formula made up? And I keep getting all these roundup errors when I keep trying to work back through, the consumption and all this sort of stuff. So I thought I need to see this formula so I can try and correct some of these mathematical errors that you sort of work backwards and then come back and you've discovered you sort of got more calories than you're supposed to have been working with in the first place. And I couldn't find any. I got to about page 8 on Google. And no word of a lie, this heading came up on Google that said, if you're looking for the formula of 1 pound equals 3,500 calories, don't bother. It doesn't exist. I thought, I can't believe I'm reading this. I've spent all this money on nutrition courses. What is this? So I clicked on it, and it had been authored by a person who I haven't mentioned so far, but for my money, offers a service that is unparalleled of anywhere in the world. And that person's Dr. Zoe Harcum. And you may have heard that name because I know she tours with Public Health Collaboration and does the low carb events. She's not pro anything,
actually,
by the way.
I haven't heard about her. Can you talk a little bit more about
Yeah,
her?
absolutely, I will. So her background, she's a fascinating person. She had a fascinating background. So I think she came out of a sort of a working class area in Wales. I think she made it to Cambridge. So obviously very clever person. I think she was only the second female president, student president in Cambridge's history. So she got first, I think, in I'm possibly wrong on this, but I seem to recall mathematical economics and politics or maths. And she went on and had a stellar career in sort of human resources and traveled the world for big blue chip companies. But in all this time, she struggled with her weight. And while she was at Cambridge, she counseled a lot of girls about fluctuations in their weight. And she'd struggled with this, and she'd undertaken loads of diets. And she thought that I think she ended up a vegan or a vegetarian. She thought that was the right way to go. And then I think she went to it may have been a PhD seminar somewhere, and on the strength of a scientific presentation, she did say from whom, but I can't remember, this person managed to convince her to ditch the veg and go back onto meat. And she drove home to Wales that night, she said, went straight back onto red meat and felt 100 times better very quickly. And this prompted her to look into nutrition so much more closely. Now, why I say she's brilliant is that she was looking for a career change, I'm assuming, at this stage. And she's decided to set up her own online company where, through a subscription process, she analyzes nutritional science. And if you subscribe, you get a Monday newsletter from her. So whenever there's clickbait appear in the national press, or she's now got a whole army of people around the world who feed scientific clickbait and new reports and new research into her to critique on a weekly basis. So I imagine she's got lists and lists of this stuff, and she cherry picks ones. And occasionally she'll go back through historic, like the 7 country study and things like this. If there's nothing around, she'll go back and do a historic one. But getting back to your point, all this information is around. Why are people not listening to it? It's a question, I think, of whose truth you choose to believe. Now, I'm not a scientist, and I think like 99% of the rest of the people in this space who go on and on about, I've read the science and I analyze science. As far as I'm concerned, you're not qualified. Looking at data in a table, to fit some belief or narrative that you have, or reading a summary on PubMed, or reading an author's summary, in the local press doesn't qualify you to determine the structure and validity and accuracy of a scientific report. So it struck me that I needed someone in my armory who had the capability to do that. And there was this person right in front of me offering this subscription service. And the Monday newsletter is incredible. I mean, there's reams and reams of it if you choose to read it, or you can just go down to the summary. But what she does is critique these papers, not from a pro carnivore, pro keto, pro carb. She's always been very open about that. She's always said if someone produced the evidence that she should be eating 400 grams of carb a day, in the interest of longevity, she'd do it. She'd switch tomorrow. But she critiques these bits of research, and with incredible amounts of detail. And occasionally you get the odd one that's sort of well structured, or could have been well structured with a few tweaks. But she is just fantastic at dissecting the validity of research, of scientific research, and explaining where the creators could have done better, or where they've gone wrong, where their reasoning and their summaries just don't match, the information that they've put forward. And it's clear, it's just there in black and white. When she points it out to you, I need someone to point that out to me. But when she points it out to you, it's you know, it's completely, you know, sort of objective, factual, and it's there. And normally, you know, if I'm in a hurry on a Monday, I might just read the summary, because sometimes that's just useful to have. But if you want the reasoning, it's all there in front of you. And I don't really know anyone else. I do remember she was sort of crucified in the Daily Mail a few years ago. Her and colleague, I think she occasionally does some writing with Dr. Kendrick, who's another commentator in this space. And the Mail did an expose on her because she sort of denounced the cholesterol theory, I think, or something of that nature. And I was like, who is this person? She must be killing people. She's not even a doctor. And I thought, then what strange reasoning? Why would people assume doctors are any better at determining the validity of science research papers? You know, they're trained in medicine. They're not trained in analyzing scientific research, and it's a skill in its own right.
Very good point. Very good point.
You know, she has the ability to look at scientific papers and completely deconstruct, you know, the entire methodology. Does the mission statement match the apparatus and the means of the test? And is the summary a true reflection of what they actually found? And I have to say, I mean, it's largely a negative experience every Monday, because I've yet to read a single piece of scientific research that seems to accurately reflect what it boasts. And normally there's a damning summary at the end of it that just, you know, usually says, as I've just detailed in the 20 pages above, this is utter nonsense. You know, they haven't found, you know, they haven't found anything that they purport to have done.
You've never received something from her that says breaking news, cornflakes is an essential nutrient.
Yeah, no, never. No, there's times when she will say, look, you know, they got very close here, and if they'd have tweaked this or tweaked that, I would love to have known the outcome. And it's a real shame that they didn't, because this was really, really well thought out, really well put together, and they got really close. But then strangely, they made this assumption or that assumption, or, you know, they didn't stop these people smoking or, you know, drinking alcohol, or, you know, there's normally something of that nature. So, you know, she is objective, and she'll give credit where it's due, but largely, you know, it's quite a disappointing, you know, you get down to the summary and you think, oh, just another epidemiology paper that, you know, that red meat's going to kill the world. And clearly that's not what was found in the data. So I think that's really valuable. And I wish, you know, in order to test my beliefs, I'm not pro anything either. I hope I've detailed that earlier in conversation, because I'm just prepared to try everything, you know, and I think that's the best way. You have to see what works on yourself. So, you know, if the evidence was there for an alternate lifestyle, I would go on it. But, you know, everything that she says, and, you know, other people that I feel talk objectively and honestly in this space, still says to me that, you know, the carnivore is, or at least the ketogenic, but the carnivore diet is, you know, is the one to choose for optimum health and lifestyle and well-being, and body composition and all the other wonderful benefits that go with it. So that's where I am currently, and that's where I'll continue to be until she and Bart and Rob, and I just love the reasoning. And that, you know, getting back to your earlier point, that's one of my sort of benchmarks, because everyone's in the possession of the science, right? Everyone, you know, if you test your beliefs by going on to Facebook or LinkedIn and put something that you know to be fairly contentious on there, which I do from time to time, because I want to see what people come back with. That's a way of, you know, it's a way of trialing your knowledge, and I do it with an open mind. Sometimes, you know, it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes someone who, you know, practices something very different, like a vegan, might come back with a point that I've yet to counter. And I go off and do the research, and, you know, I think that's healthy. It's a healthy way to be. But, you know, everyone claims to be in possession of the science, and you get into these discussions, and it can be with a dietitian or a nutritionist, and they just try and shut you down and say, oh, but my science is more accurate than your science. I don't follow a curriculum, I follow the science. And you think, well, we're at different ends of the spectrum. No, not everyone's science can be equal. I think I mean, for me, you've got to find your own truth in this. I have so many people come up to me socially and at work who are interested in it. And they go, oh, but I've heard this, and there's these doctors on the internet saying the cholesterol will kill you. And I said, look, you know, you're old enough and ugly enough. You've been in this world a long time, like I have. Go and find your own way through it. Go and find your own truth. You know, you've got to listen to the person that's speaking to you with objectivity, with reasoning. I mean, for me, you know, it's the likes of Bart's explanations, you know, physiology. It's Zoe's breakdown of scientific data. It's the magnificent way Rob Cyrus talks about physiology in his videos as the carb addiction doc, and how he's sort of gone back to traditional medicine methods of using physiology to determine sort of cause and effect and diagnose, rather than just, you know, logarithms and stats. And you know, and that's what I listen for. I just listen for reasoning. I listen for calm reasoning. I listen for wisdom, and I try not to go down rabbit holes. You know, I just think about micronutrient profiles, and I think about what was learned about physiology, you know, 100 years ago, about how fat was stored and metabolized, and how it's a, you know, a hormonal process. And I can imagine how that's an uncomfortable truth for a lot of organizations who have probably attempted to bury it for the last 50, 60 years. But I just hold on to those principles. I've already proved to myself that they work. I know how fat is now stored in my body, and I know how to burn it off. And calories in, calories out certainly didn't contribute to that. And all the people can come at me that they like and say, well, you must have been doing it wrong. Well, I was educated in it, and it just didn't work for me. So,
And
you know,
that's the thing, right? You know, we've got the evidence that it's what's working for us is in front of us, right? Whether it's working or not, our body's telling us, our body's giving us the feedback.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. I mean, the mental clarity. I just don't think about food anymore. I don't think about it. I'm not hungry. You know, I play cricket on a Saturday, still at a decent standard. Most often, I go off and play completely fasted. I don't get to 2 o'clock and think, oh, I'm going to faint. I don't. I could go right through to the evening before I have my first meal. It doesn't affect my performance at all. Doesn't affect my energy levels. Doesn't affect my recovery. I don't think about food really. I'm not hungry. You know, if something happened now that required me to leave this house and not consume food again till this evening, well, I've got lots of fat stores to dip into, and it's there for me. You know, it sustains me. I could go and dig the garden up, do anything I like. At the moment, I haven't eaten, and I won't till I feel I need to, and that's just how I live. And some days, actually, it becomes 4 or 5 meals, and some days it's just two. But I don't snack. I meal prep at the start of each week because I find that helps. So I've got a bit of a Saturday routine, and I'll be going off shortly to a local butcher, buying grass-fed meat, which is expensive. But then again, I now don't buy all of the salads and vegetables and things to go with it. So that sort of evens itself out in terms of cost. And yeah, it's all local reared grass-fed stuff. And I'll meal prep, and I'll make 2 lots of steak up. And normally I may consume the first one at 11, 12 o'clock at work, and then the second one 7, 8 o'clock at night, possibly with some cheese. And so this yogurt thing has become a bit of an after work habit in between. It's, you know, it's not having a massively negative impact. It's a way of supplementing protein intake, which if I'm training is useful. Because it's hard to keep eating meat when, you know, if you're not hungry, then, you know, it's a way of supplementing the protein just to support, you know, training. So it's still having some value, even though I know it's probably not the best thing to consume. But yeah, that's how I do it, and that's
So
working well for me.
what's the kind of climate like in the UK at the moment as far as anti-meat? Is it getting more difficult, or are you getting more resistance? Like if you tell people I basically just eat meat and eggs, you know, are they going to be like down your throat?
Yeah, it's I mean, clearly like it is everywhere else in the world. I mean, I see what's going on in Australia and the States. It's volatile, let's put it that way. It's volatile. I think if I have any genuine concerns, there's well-intentioned people like us prepared to debate with other well-intentioned people in this space who don't share our views. And although it may occasionally get heated and some silliness might come out, I think the intentions are good. What concerns me is that regardless of us and regardless of them, there's just this continuing movement underneath all this that's going to have its own way in the end anyway. And if the money is where fake plant food is, then ultimately they'll just keep pushing until that's what we're forced to consume. I mean, I try not to comment on it too much publicly because it just sounds like you're a conspiracy theorist, and what you have to say about the benefits of carnivore living, then suddenly just you can lose credibility. But, I think people open your eyes, the way the world works. There isn't a ministry of truth anywhere to be found anywhere in the world, but there's lots of ministry of prophets in disguise. And, what's good for us or bad for us doesn't come into it. You've got to find your own way through that. And I'm fearful. It does worry me. I mean, like I said to you earlier, everyone's in possession of the science. I came home the other night listening to a boiler maintenance advert on the radio, and the voiceover guy it was on the basis that if you have your boiler serviced once a year, you're contributing to a more efficient boiler, and you're not damaging the climate. But it started off, I think, by saying something like, we know there's things that we could do to make this world a better place, like switching from real milk to almond milk. And I thought, there it is. Here's a guy now this bloke probably hasn't even looked at nutrition once in his life, but now he's in possession of the science because it's what's in the mainstream media. It must be right? So it gives him the right to say it. So you got some voiceover guy on the radio now reading a script telling you that almond milk is safer for the planet or better for the planet in the long term than cow's milk, which I think I think it's been well publicized now. The methods of making almond milk don't seem to be particularly conducive to helping the planet. But that is just an example. It's a weird example and a small example, but it's endemic. And you think, people are brainwashed by this stuff. It's coming out of every radio. All these cars when people tired, traveling home from work, and must eat almond milk. I'll do my bit at the weekend. And it's it's teachers having vegan days and serving, there's images on Facebook of kids being fed chips, cheap chicken nuggets, rice, sugary baked beans, and a lump of bread all on one plate. I mean, it's a massive
and that's
sugar overload on the basis of
well
what
balanced.
Teacher thinks,
well
balanced sugar load, yeah. just go every type of denomination of sugar you can think of on there. You think, you don't know it. In my opinion, you're killing these kids, on the basis of what? So even teachers think they know. It's like I said to you earlier, everyone think they're in possession of the science. Everyone thinks they know what's right because, it's drummed into them through the media. It is worrying. We have meat-free cities here now. If you fell ill in Edinburgh and you went into an NHS hospital in Edinburgh, you're not getting real protein. You're going to get whatever guise it comes in, tofu or lentils.
Really?
Yeah, the meat-free cities are coming, yeah. So, yeah, I'm pretty certain that's the case. Edinburgh was the first, and I think there'll be others to follow. So, yeah, it does worry me. I don't want to stop them doing their thing, but I don't want people to stop me doing mine. I don't want to have my choices removed from me because of what I believe in. Force, this ideology onto me on, in my opinion, the misguided belief that are somehow better for the climate. It's just, I live not far from a tomato factory, and I don't use that word lightly. It's a factory, and I always use this point when I argue with vegans. I said, you don't go and pick your stuff from the hedgerow over some wild common. It's made, tomatoes are not indigenous. There's a greenhouse factory near to me that's about a mile long, that's lit and heat 24 hours a day, and they're sprayed with God knows what. How's that any better for the climate than what I do, than going down the road and eating a cow that's grazed locally? I don't get it. I mean, you're you're just facilitating one. I get the argument about cheap meat and cheap meat factories, but they're no better than the apparatus that's used to grow all these non-indigenous crops and vegetables. You're just facilitating one conglomerate, multi-trillion-dollar industry over another. You're just a soundpiece for them. So I don't subscribe to that either. But it's difficult. But yeah, it does worry me. I think the powers that be always get their own way. The narrative continues. We're all selfish, for eating mince and and eggs, and we're going to ruin the planet in the long run. So I suspect probably not in my lifetime. I'm 50 now and perhaps too old to care. I'll still be able to eat what I want to eat till the end. But God knows what the future looks like for people. I mean, I'd be very alarmed if I was a teenager. I'd be very alarmed at what I'm going to be forced to consume by the time, they're my age.
Yeah, although I think the thing is, no one's really alarmed as a teenager, I think, because when you're raised in that kind of environment, you don't know any different, right?
No, absolutely right. I went to a large sporting event recently, and very good point. Yeah, there was a lot of vendors there, and it was noticeable that the younger vendors had the meat-free farm stands and vegan stands. So yeah, they're being firmly sort of indoctrinated in that, aren't they? And that's their beliefs. And who knows if we'll ever really sort of get to the truth. But what a mess we're in. I mean, what a mess. Another one of my sort of pillars of my beliefs, one of the things that I try and sort of, you go down so many rabbit holes with this stuff. You have to go back to a point where you think, right, okay, let's start again. Let's go back to whether it's the physiology of fat loss or whatever, and then sort of work forward. It's so important to have those points of reference to work back to.
You mentioned that at work, people are interested in what you're doing, but have you had any friends or family or work colleagues that are like, "You're crazy, Adam. You're going to die," or a doctor even?
Yeah, I mean, there's people within my family now that are concerned for my well-being, only eating meat, and they can't. My father-in-law can't get his. He mentions us to my wife every 6 weeks, and is he still eating meat? Yes, he is. Yeah,
it's like you're terminal in hospital. How's he doing this week?
Well, he's how's he doing this week? Well, he has had heart issues, so he's been through that. Outcome of we're going to monitor your cholesterol. Here's a list of things to eat. Here's a list of things to avoid. Don't touch fats in any way, shape, or form. Eat your white toast, eat your grains, eat your cereals, eat your fruit. That's better for your arteries in the long run. So that's, as far as he's concerned, that's keeping him alive. That's his methodology, and I have mine. But yeah, I mean, it's usually met with fascination. And some people get it. I was at a works thing last night actually, where the caterer there, it was a hog roast, and someone keto came up in conversation because it's a bit of a thing at work with people know I follow it, so it's a bit of a joke every time we go out or meet. It's his body's a temple stuff. I have to get through all of that rubbish before. So there was white rolls there, and then what are you going to do with that? And I wasn't being polite, just allowed her to serve it to me, and I ate the pork out of it, and I threw the roll away. And I ended up having a really nice conversation with her because she wanted to practice keto, and she was finding some elements of it. She had 3 young children, so all the meal prep side, having to do something separate for her, she had 3 kids, full-time job, part-time job as a caterer. She was studying on the side. So we were just talking about the intricacies of that, how difficult it is to navigate. But yes, yeah, I mean, you meet the odd person, but most people that you tell you just eat meat think that you're, probably 2 weeks away from an imminent death, and need to change your point of view very quickly for your own well-being. But I can assure them I'm here alive. I'm 51. I'd go chase any of them around the block now if they want to run. I'm not a runner, but I'm full of energy. I'll give it a go. I still play sport at decent standard, and I hope to continue to whilst my eyes allow me and whilst my joints allow me. And it supports all of that. I've seen a few little sort of autoimmune things improve as well as a consequence. Although that wasn't really my angle. I have to be honest and say it was body composition and just a determination really to find out what does and doesn't work. That's really what I'm all about. I've mentioned this on LinkedIn before. I was so lucky to work for a guy for 16 years, from 97 through to 2013. I was in his company, and he was a guy who had such a profound impact on my thinking because he questioned everything. He took nothing for granted. He made no assumptions. Whatever he got involved with, he came back in at the ground level and made his own mind up, and just, whatever was mainstream thinking, he wasn't interested in it. But funnily enough, he was considered something of an eccentric, and he certainly wasn't easy to work with at times. And commercially we clashed because someone had to make sense of that approach and turn it into something that actually paid our mortgages. But bless him, God, I realise what I've had working with him, because it's put that mindset in me, and I just feel the need to, to look at everything afresh and and find my own way through it, and just take nothing for granted. And I think that's helpful in this space and on this topic.
Yeah, it definitely. So you mentioned your father-in-law. So is your wife doing this or doing keto or anything like that along with you, or are you kind of eating differently?
No, we eat differently. Actually, because of our lifestyles and her commitments, I do a lot of the cooking, and I always said at the outset, you do whatever you think is right. I mean, I believe in it very strongly. I talk about it a lot, way more than she'd want to hear. I can bore on the subject for hours. I'm sure we all can. And I've tried very hard to make sure that I don't become judgmental in social circles and things like that, because no one wants to be around that guy, do they? Sitting there at the barbecue scowling at people for eating bread and stuff like that. I mean, that's, I'll talk about it, but that's your choice. So I don't really want to be that person. I don't want to be ostracized. And I tried to take the same view with her, but it must be difficult for her because, it's a passion of mine and I talk about it incessantly. But she's her own person. She does her own things. Never force her. I cook things that I hope she likes and she enjoys. And I would say actually she's now a low carber, because purely of her own abolition, she recognized that she feels quite uncomfortable when carbohydrates are reintroduced. Certain carbohydrates anyway are reintroduced to her diet. But she likes different textures. I fascinate her and my family that I can eat the same thing every day. That blows their mind. I mean, you're eating steak again today. Well, you ate it yesterday. I said, yeah, and I'll be eating it every day for the next however many years I'm alive. Doesn't bother me at all. I work hard, I get hungry, and I eat the same thing. But she likes different textures and different things. So I bear that in mind when I shop. And she'll eat meat and vegetables. And she'll occasionally treat herself. I mean, she likes ice cream in the summer. She occasionally likes her desserts. But I would say she's not a stringent low carber, but she does recognize, I think, the validity in the argument and the truth in how fat is stored and metabolized, because she's experimented with it on herself. She's just not, she's happier with a balance, whereas I just have that tunnel vision. And I cook for her in that way, and she'll occasionally treat herself to a piece of chocolate or an ice cream or whatever. But she's sporty like me. She keeps herself in good shape, so that works for her, and she plays around with it from time to time. But we eat completely different things, and now at different times, but it still works.
Nice. So, you mentioned LinkedIn before. So, do you have any social media if people want to reach out to you? Do you have a YouTube, Instagram?
I haven't actually. I've been encouraged. I mean, this is this thought process is relatively new. I've kept something of a low profile in that regard. I've just been happy, really, following my own sort of research and occasionally reaching out to the likes of yourself and Richard and Bart to talk. But I am being encouraged. I've recently been approached by an ex-vegan whose health deteriorated quite badly on the diet, who is now eating meat. And it was actually our local butcher that connected us. And I am now being encouraged to travel with her to do talks on a broad
Wow.
range of subjects. So she wants to do, sort of welfare workshops. She's into sound therapy. She's an ex-psychiatric nurse, very interesting background, and she's into sound therapies and more holistic means of mental health recovery and things like this. But she sees diet as obviously a big part of that. Now she's sleeping better and already tidying up a lot of her own sort of autoimmune conditions for going back on to meat diet. So we've had a couple of meetups, and she wants me to sort of join her at a few local events to discuss my sort of anecdotal evidence. And I'm part of the reason why I was delighted to have this conversation today, because it could form. It's nothing like talking about it openly, is there? When you're locked in your own head with this stuff and just researching it quietly in the corner of a coffee shop, it's different to being challenged, and it's different to talking openly about it. And I know it's going to be difficult because I know there's an equal number of people that share opposing views, and I've just got to think. I think I've got to think of the right approach, and for me, the scientific one. If you want to go and research it, go and look at it. I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to pretend to be. I'm not going to try and revise all the Bart stuff verbatim, because I think ultimately, I haven't got that background, and I'll get found out doing it. I think there's other ways to promote this message, and I think ultimately it's to encourage people to keep an open mind and go and find their version of the truth. Because I think ultimately that's what we're all doing. We're all looking for our version of the truth. I think so, as I said before, I think so few of us are qualified to actually determine what that is scientifically. So you've just got to find these pillars of understanding that form the bench, the bench of your belief. The objectivity, basic proven physiology, anecdotal stuff by experimenting on yourself, calm objectivity. I mean, often you'll get into debates with people who immediately start sending you clickbait from the Daily Mail or something like this, and you think, well, that's not yeah, that's not an argument. So yeah, I haven't got. I'd like to be able to say here's this Instagram and that Instagram. Perhaps I've been healthier mentally for not having them, but I think the time's coming where I probably have to get out there and do the right thing. I think that's how you'd view it. I think if you've got a message, if something worked for you, if you believe it's a good way and a healthy way to live, I think then you're probably obligated to share it, and at least try and push back against the tide of what we believe to be rubbish coming our way.
Adam, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your journey. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
And you, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.